and welcome to Innovation Celebration, the show where we celebrate advancements in science and technology, the people and ideas that make them possible, and the ways in which they enhance human flourishing. I'm Angelica Walker-Worth, and this is my husband Thomas. And today we're diving into the ideas aspect with a topic that neither of us are really experts in, but we're both very interested in because we understand and appreciate its importance, which is education. So to help us out, as we're not experts, we've brought our friend Hannah Frankman. Hannah is a former program manager at Praxis. She is a guest instructor at Objective Standard Institute, where she teaches the art of finding and creating opportunities. She recently finished with us the Henry Hazlitt Fellowship at Foundation for Economic Education, and her newest venture is with Rebel Educator. So we're going to definitely dig into that last part, but could you start, Hannah, by telling us about your educational background?
Yeah, I like to joke that I've been in education since I was 6 because I grew up homeschooled. So I got my first taste of what it's like to be outside of the system when I was 6 years old in first grade. Grew up homeschooled all the way through high school, skipped college to go work for this college alternative program called Praxis. And that's where I really started to solidify my career trajectory, which has been in education ever since. I did some work tutoring and teaching homeschoolers and teaching homeschool classes. I've worked with Praxis. I've worked with a number of different organizations in the education space. And now I'm building this Rebel Educator brand to help people who want to pull their kids out of the traditional system, but aren't sure where to start or what to do. Trying to become the resource that answers those questions, because there are so many people who are really frustrated by the status quo of education, but don't really know where to start or what to do next, because the resources are weirdly hard to find. It's a topic that it's like there's a stunning lack of resources on. So trying to solve that problem with Rebel Educator. But yeah, I've been in education for a long time, and it's something that's kind of been an accident. Like, I didn't really mean to end up here. I just kind of kept finding projects that I was excited about until I finally gave in. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm in like education for my career. I guess this is happening.
Some of the people with I know who have the coolest careers said, basically I just followed what I was interested in, and that's how I ended up here. And that sounds like that's what you did. So a lot of things there we want to come back to, but can we start out with how would you say that your sort of alternative educational background has helped you succeed in what you're doing today?
I feel like this is actually something that I'm still wrapping my head around, because I grew up so far outside of the traditional system that I didn't realize how different that was until I was well into my 20s. I remember people when I was in my early 20s describing me as like having kooky ideas or having like weird, interesting paradigm because of my education background. And I was just like, huh? I didn't understand what they were referring to, because I didn't realize just how different the entire worldview I had was because of my education. But I think I write a lot with Rebel Educator about the implicit lessons that school is teaching kids that are detrimental to their long-term success and their long-term capacity for growth. And as I'm like, that's actually been a really interesting exercise for me, because it's helping me kind of pinpoint a lot of these things that I just missed altogether. Like, I never had the traditional classroom experience. I never had all of the implicit lessons that are being taught to you about deferring to authority and waiting for permission. And like, there's one right answer, and your whole job is just to like figure out what the one right answer is that the teacher has in their head. Is like, guess a number kind of thing. Like, I skipped all of that. And so I learned a very different set of lessons around being very self-directed and like learning how to trust what I'm interested in, and kind of finding the path between where I am now and where I want to be, and like chasing those interests and those goals to achieve that end, which is something that like, yeah, everybody kind of hypothetically understands how to do that, but there's a very different way of understanding how to do that when that is your entire education experience for 12 years. So I think that there's a lot that I learned about being just sort of forging my own path, finding what's interesting to me, not looking to some institution or some authority figure to grant me permission to go do the thing that I want to do, or being the gatekeeper for that, which is a theme that showed up in my career again and again and again. Like, I skipped college, and I went and hacked my way into a startup job that I really wanted. And then I left that and I went and hacked my way into being a freelancer. And now I'm running my own business. Like I'm slowly realizing just how far everything about my career journey has been from the traditional path that most people follow. Which is a weird thing to think about, because for a long time I thought I was pretty average in terms of like the things that I was doing. So I feel like there's been a lot of things like that have really shaped how I look at the world. And the more I come into the knowledge that that's the case, the more strongly I feel about talking about this, because I'm realizing that there are a lot of assumptions that I have about how the world works and what I'm capable of and kind of what the process is to go from where I am to where I want to be, that has enabled me to live a life that I'm really enjoying. And I feel like a lot of kids never have the chance to experience that in their childhoods. And that's something that I feel very, very strongly that I want to talk about, because I know that it's really tough for parents to do something that's different from the status quo. So the more you can hear people talking about like what it looks like to do that successfully, the more courage it gives parents to take the leap and create that type of learning experience for their own kids. So both like the actual lessons that I learned, but also me realizing how grateful I am for them have both been huge drivers in where my career has taken me.
Yeah, that nicely sort of segues into the next thing I wanted to say, which is, one of the reasons we talk a lot about innovation on here is because it breaks those old paradigms that don't work anymore, that without people questioning those systems just stay in frozen aspect forever. And that's one thing I wanted to ask about, and you sort of addressed it a bit already, talking about that authority paradigm and that classroom structure. But what are the issues, particularly in America, because I know it's worse than it is here and it's bad here, but particularly in America, what are the problems with public education as it exists at the moment? And I know they are many, but like just structurally,
the big ones.
fundamentally, not so much the specific state by state issues, but the really fundamental issues.
I mean, how long do we have to talk about this? Because it's a really long list. There are a lot of issues with the education system as it stands, like the status quo of how we educate our kids. And the biggest one is that it's an incredibly outdated model. We've been running the same education system with very little innovation in the actual structure for far too many years. The way our current education system was structured, it's intended to be like an industrial training ground. Basically, it's designed to create people who will become good workers in an industrial environment. And so like everything about the education system is very industrial, like the bells and the sitting in rows and all of these things that are very like it's getting you ready, it's priming you to make an easy transition to working in a factory somewhere. But it's also, so like it has all of these like very practical things that it's teaching you how to do. Like it's sending you down these different avenues of like career paths. But it's also, again, the implicit assumptions of it are teaching you kind of like, this is how the world works. You grew up in it. And so it's a very easy transition to go work that way as an adult. And our world has changed so much since the education system was built. The types of careers that people are going into, especially with the advent of the internet, are really, really different. School has a lot of implicit assumptions about like career trajectories. When you go to a guidance counselor in school and they're talking about career tracks, it's like, do you want to be a teacher until you retire at 65? Do you want to be a doctor until you retire at 65? Is the implicit assumption around how your career is going to unfold. And when you look at most people's career trajectories, especially over the past couple of decades, as things like the working world has really opened up, both in terms of access and also in terms of ease of movement, most people don't do the same thing for their whole careers. And most people don't have to know what they're going to do even 5 years down the road when they graduate from school, but school's still trying to set you into these very rigid paths where it's like, this is the highway to becoming a teacher and you're going to do that forever. And you need to know by the time that you're graduating from high school that that's what you want to do, so you can go pick the right college, so you can get the right credentialing, so you can do that until you retire. And so that's really broken because that's not actually a reflection at all of how the world works. And it's teaching kids a lot of really unproductive at kindest assumptions about what they're going to expect when they get out of school that they have to unlearn. And then again, there's all of the implicit assumptions around like how the world works that kids are learning that are really, really, really detrimental actually to their ability to have long-term success, because everything in school is like teaching you need to conform, you need to find the right answer. And the people who are successful, and you guys know this as people who talk to innovators all of the time, the people who have the largest impact on the world are the people who don't follow the rules and come up with a new answer. And that's something that, yes, there are amazing teachers who facilitate that and teach kids those really important lessons, but the system as a whole isn't structured that way. And so kids are learning a set of habits that are keeping them very passive in the way that they're both approaching their education and approaching their adult lives, because that's how they learn the world works. There's a lot of passivity in school, not just in the realm of creativity, but like, you sit down in a classroom and somebody tells you what to do. And you do that you repeat that for 12 years. And again, like that's not what drives success in the real world. You have to be really self-directed and self-contained. And you have to be able to say, hey, I want to go do this. I'm going to go make it happen to see success in whatever trajectory you decide to take outside of school. There's also this weird assumption in school that like there's school, and then there's the real world, which happens after school, and school is a prerequisite to go into the real world. And that's also very broken because kids are capable of far more than the system gives them credit for. And if you give them the space and the time and enough freedom and trust in themselves to take the agency, they can go build amazing things. Kids can launch businesses when they're still in school. I had a business when I was in middle school and high school, because I had the freedom and the space to go try stuff. And eventually I tried something that people wanted to pay me for. And I was like, well, this is fun. Of course I'm going to keep doing this. I'm a little capitalist. I like this money. And I was not exceptional at all in the realm of homeschoolers and kids who have self-directed educations in taking that path. The thing that made me different from public school kids is I had the space to do it. The kids are capable of so much when they're still in high school. And yet they're consistently fed everything through this framework of you have to, all of these prerequisite boxes have to be checked, including college. That's a huge implicit assumption in all of this, that all these boxes have to be checked before you can go do anything in the real world, before you can go actually do anything. And that's really broken too. And then from a very practical standpoint, there's so much about the model in the classrooms themselves that's incredibly ineffective. Trying to teach, there's no way that you can get 30 kids in any given geographical area who actually are all on the same level and all need to be taught exactly the same thing. So there's this kind of generalized lumping of groups of kids that is beneficial to the average kid in every room, but is incredibly detrimental to anybody who's not average, either because they're farther along or because they haven't arrived at that point yet. All of those kids are getting left behind. And so you end up with these very generalized classrooms where you're teaching everybody in the room kind of generically what you need to know, but no kid's actually mastering it. And they're coming through the system with these huge gaps in their knowledge because they're just sort of there's this weird chronological structure too, where they're we have to, organize kids somehow. So once enough time has elapsed, they get moved to the next stage. And that's also a very weird assumption to put around. I get it from a convenience standpoint, but it's not actually a valid assumption about how kids learn. It's not if you sit them in a classroom for 9 months, they've automatically learned enough and you can move them along to the next grade. So kids are coming through the school system without any real mastery. And most of them have very large gaps in their knowledge that actually slow them down quite a bit. They're being taught through coercion. So they come to resent a lot of the subjects that they're being taught. And you see it in test scores. Kids in the US score honestly kind of abysmally on a global scale in terms of where their proficiency is in different subjects. And a lot of that comes down to it's just a really flawed model that kids are being put through. So there's just like huge gaps that are being, like chasms that are just being ignored. And a lot of kids end up doing really poorly, and they don't really care because the whole system is just set up to kind of force you through with coercion, and that is not a way to inspire any innate desire to be successful in the system at all. You're just trying to get through it. And so all of those things combined set up a system that's teaching kids how to hate learning and how to do the bare minimum to get by, and how to defer to authority to give them the standard of like, okay, what's the bare minimum that I have to do in order for me to just like make it to the next level, and then make it to the next level until I graduate and I don't have to do this anymore. And then I've entered the real world, and I'll like, take whatever career trajectory sounds most palatable, instead of facilitating kids to have this deep innate love of learning and self-direction and ability to say, learning stuff is fun. I really want to go know how to do this thing. So I'm going to go learn to the task or learn to the goal. And I know how to go find all the information that I need to do it. And I know what it means to measure for myself whether or not I've become proficient enough in this to hit my goal. And I know how to rinse and repeat that process ad infinitum until I die, basically. Like for whatever career trajectory I want to take, or however many career trajectories I want to take, whatever projects I want to take on, however I want to grow and evolve in my life, which is the much more holistic and also reasonable way to approach education, because that's actually what's going to be beneficial for an individual over the course of their lifetime. Like that's the skill set that they need to learn, and school's teaching none of it.
Yeah, the point you made about knowledge gaps, sort of tying into what you just said as well about making it more individualized. Like there's, on the one hand, there's the fact that it's a one size fits all system, and different people have different needs and different aptitudes and different interests. But there's also the point that like some guy just decided like what subjects everyone learns and what everyone doesn't. And I remember thinking like a few years after leaving school, why do I know molecular chemistry and I don't know what the stock market is? I don't know what an exchange traded fund is. But like I know what a hydrocarbon is. Like I know things that are oddly specific to one industry, but not general stuff that would really help me in life. And it's that lack of competition, lack of choice in what you learn is part of the reason for those knowledge gaps that everyone has, whatever their aptitude is, because they're just not taught some of this stuff.
Yeah, everybody's put in this classical education box, and I'm kind of a nerd, so like I am not here to bash classical education at all. I think classical education is amazing. Like I loved reading medieval literature when I was in high school and stuff. Like, is that relevant to most of my day-to-day life? No. Is that enriching for me and it makes me happy? Yes. But there's a lot of things that are just sort of assumed or standard knowledge that everybody needs to have that's super irrelevant. And kids waste a ton of time on it. Like if you don't care about chemistry, you're never going to reference it again. You're probably going to think chemistry is awful for the rest of your life because you were forced to spend time on it. Where is the net benefit to that, to having a good chemistry score that's never going to be referenced again in your life? It's like making you a more well-rounded person. Isn't learning about the stock markets, like you said, also making you a more well-rounded person? Like, can we round in a different direction that's maybe more interesting to this person? It's just a very flawed set of assumptions around what kids need to learn. And it's a weird thing too, because especially in the era of the internet, and so much, like we haven't even come close to catching up to what the internet has unlocked in terms of potential with education. Like we're just scratching the surface of what is possible. Most industries have advanced way faster with what the internet has opened up than education has. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And we can get into that a little bit if we want to, but it's because the internet changes access to information for everybody. It becomes less and less important to get these prerequisites in within a certain time constraint when you're in school, because if it ever becomes relevant to understand chemistry, you just type in khanacademy.org in your browser and you can pull up an entire huge world-class course on chemistry, and you can go do that on your own time when you're 15 or when you're 35 or when you're 65, and you're like, now I wish I'd gotten some chemistry background, but it's not necessary to get it while you're in school. And there are a lot of things that are very valuable that school doesn't teach at all, like finance, like investing, like paying your taxes. I don't understand why. I mean, if it's a government school, they should be teaching you how to pay the taxes that are funding the school that you're going to be obligated for once you start working. Like all of these different things that are so valuable for your like life once you come out of school that just is never touched. It's been a really long time since the subjects that are taught in school have been re-examined, and they're very outdated too. And the idea, like even the idea that everybody needs to learn the same thing is flawed. Like, yeah, everybody needs to know basic arithmetic and basic spelling and basic grammar to function in the world. Like those are pretty basic prerequisites for everything. But beyond that, there's a lot of room for customization. And that's part of what's so exciting about the different innovation projects that are being worked on in education, is that they're really going back to a first principles understanding of what is necessary for a child to graduate into adulthood with a solid knowledge foundation to succeed in the world. Like, what does that mean? And that's a really important philosophical question to ask. And there are some brilliant people who are asking that question and then building education models around the answers that they find. And the answers are not all the same. And that is okay. That's actually good, because different kids have different interests and different life trajectories, and they don't all need to learn the same things. So some kids want a really solid philosophical grounding and like mental models grounding. And some kids want a really solid practical entrepreneurship grounding. And some people want really solid problem solving groundings. And there's like different kind of frameworks around what is that foundation that are all equally legitimate and equally valuable. But when you go back to that first principles, like you shave away everything, and there are so many assumptions to pull away because education is so deeply ingrained into our culture that it's just like there's a lot to peel back that we don't even realize is there. But when you shave all of that away, you can come to some really interesting conclusions about what's actually valuable to teach kids, and then, build back up and build a really interesting education model around that.
So let me ask you about that then. We know about some different innovations in terms of different models. Homeschooling we've touched on, Montessori education. We are familiar with some people who work with a Montessori company called Higher Ground, who are building schools everywhere. You touched a little bit on internet learning. What do you think are some of the best and most exciting models that are being built and coming up recently?
Yeah, there's been a real explosion over the past few years, and COVID has really accelerated that, because like one of the biggest silver linings from the pandemic was that everybody brought school home, and everybody realized just how awful school is when they saw it through Zoom at home. They're like, wait a second, this is what my kid's doing? Like, I forgot that this is what it was like from when I was in school, or maybe it's gotten worse. I don't know. But it's really shifted. It shifted the Overton window of what's acceptable too, because pre-COVID, most people thought, oh my gosh, I can't imagine having my kids home all day. But then everybody had to have their kids home all day for 2 years. So it became like the set of assumptions around what possible shifted, and people said, wait a second, I've already had my kids home all day and we're all still alive. So like this kind of works. So like maybe I can explore other options around online schools or homeschooling or hybrid schools. Plus so many people's work went remote, and the Overton window shifted there too. It's a lot harder for companies to argue that you have to be in person when you were very successfully working from home for 2 years and everything was functioning fine. So parents have more options too, because they're able to be at home if their kids are in an online school or something like that. So the range of what's possible is expanding very rapidly now. And there are a few different kind of like categories of models that are really exciting. The micro school movement is picking up speed, and that's a really cool thing to watch. Basically, it's like a much smaller group of kids than a traditional classroom. Like a lot of micro schools are like have around 10 kids. And oftentimes it's a range of ages too. Sometimes it's all the same grade, but often it's like a micro school of elementary age kids. And you kind of have a broader spectrum. Because it's a smaller group, the teacher can tailor to the needs of each individual child much more effectively. And because it's outside of the system, the teacher can also tailor to the specific interests of the different kids and, create, like really craft, actually is the right word here, craft an education experience that's much more beneficial for the individual children involved. And the kids have the ability, like in this learning environment that's being constructed, they can be a lot more interactive. They can be, especially if you have like different age levels and different interests, they can help each other. And there are some really, really interesting models that are being built to facilitate micro schools. So there's a company called Prenda that their model is super interesting. They work with different states to get state funding for schools in the same way a charter school gets funding. And so they'll get funding per kid. And then basically that funding covers paying for a teacher and then funding the work that HQ is doing to facilitate this work for these different micro schools. So effectively, if you can get a teacher and enough parents assembled in a state where there is enough school choice flexibility for Prenda to work within the system to get that charter school funding, like effectively your kids can go to a micro school for free because your tax dollars are going to funding your micro school instead of funding your public school. So it's a really interesting model, and there's a lot of work that's being done to facilitate school choice in different states. And as that expands, like from a legal standpoint, it's going to become easier and easier for models like that to grow, which is very exciting. Online schools are also really cool because you have you don't have the geographic restrictions. So somebody in the desert in the middle of Nevada and somebody in a high rise in New York City can be in the same class because they have the same interests and they both want to be learning about the same thing. And you're not restricted to what kids are in your area geographically, which means that kids can get a lot more niched down around their interests and what they're learning. And it means that they can make friends with people who have the same quirky interests that they do, which is a real deficit of the geographic learning model, where it's like, hey, these are randomly the like 36 kids in your age group who happen to be born in your town. So these are your friends now. And it's kind of like, but I don't have anything in common with them. And that can be really isolating for kids who really do thrive when they get to learn and work on projects with kids who have shared interests. And so this ability to get really niche down, like a kid could take a writing class online and find the 5 other kids in the country who share their really niche interest in this specific poet and trying to like replicate the style of the specific poet. Like they're all interested in the same thing. And it's not even, I say in the country, but it's not even limited to that. There's a company called Kubrio that runs a world school. So they do classes. They have like 3 different time zones around the world. So like the world's divided into thirds, and then they'll be running classes in each of these time zones, basically 24/7. And so you can opt into classes in whichever of these regions you're in. And a lot of families who are both like stationary in one place, but also who are digital nomads and are traveling the world will sign their kids up for Kubrio, and they can take all of these different classes based around their interests. And they have all kinds of niche. They have art classes and drama classes, and then like your more standard kind of academic classes, and then like how to design a video game classes, and like understanding the basics of AutoCAD, or like whatever nerdy interest that your kid has. They can meet other kids from all around the world. And sometimes the kids will even like intentionally sign up, like they'll be in the US, but they'll sign up for a class in the Asian time zone because they want to go meet kids in other countries and make new friends. So there's really interesting models like that too, where kids can really get niched down around their interests. And then you start to see schools emerging that are built around really specific interests instead of skill sets, like Synthesis, which is based on Elon Musk's Ad Astra School, which was in California. It was started for his kids and for the kids of other engineers at Tesla and SpaceX. And it became like this really interesting model that a couple people took and spun off and turned into an online school called Synthesis that's built all around problem solving. And like teamwork and collaboration. So in games, so kids are getting these like problem solving games that they're learning how to work through. So it's basically like they get on Zoom and they play games with their friends all day, but they're learning all of these different mental models and frameworks and all these different skills that are required to solve these puzzles in these games. And for kids who are like really analytical in that way, that's an amazing school for them to be in. And for kids who want to be writers, David Perel is launching a version of Rite of Passage, his online writing course for adults that's specific for high schoolers. So kids who really want to be writers can go take a spin-off of that. And I think that's a model that we'll see a lot more of over the next few years, is these like quote unquote celebrity instructors, like these people who are like a big name on Twitter or a big name on YouTube, and people really love and admire. They'll build courses that kids can actually go take. They can go say, hey, this is my favorite YouTuber. This is my favorite commentator on, I don't know, games or history or whatever. And I'm going to go take their course. So there's a lot of different models like that that are also expanding on top of all of the in-person schools that are being built that are either, like you said, things like Montessori through Higher Ground or something like Acton Academy, or its own independent model of in-person school. And then it's also really cool to see people are starting to build self-directed learning centers too, which are like places that kids can go and like maybe they're an unschooler or maybe they're in an online program or maybe they're doing some kind of hybrid thing and they can all go to this learning center and interact with each other and work together. So you still get the social elements of school, but without the academic constraints of everybody having to do the same thing. So there's a lot of really different interesting models that are emerging here. Like even this list that I'm giving you is kind of scratching the surface. Like there's a very high level overview of some of the different buckets that people are working within, but there's a lot that's happening. And I think the sheer numbers are just as exciting, if not more exciting than the things themselves, because it's indicating that the variance is finally occurring, which should have happened a really long time ago, which allows kids to find the models that are best for them, and not even in a like the kind of the like we talked about with school and like you have to pick the track that you're going to be on forever. Like there aren't even those constraints anymore. If a kid really loves one thing in elementary school and then they want to go do something totally different in middle school and then like go do some type of apprenticeship in high school because they're like, hey, I'm really excited to go do this actual type of work after I graduate, all of that becomes possible, which allows kids to get a really tailored, self-driven education, which is how it should be.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did online school before it was cool. I like to say because I am old enough to have been before that was a thing. But I did my last 3 years of high school online, and that was a public school, Wisconsin-run school. But there was still a lot more choice. There were a lot more classes. Like I took astronomy because I thought that was really cool, and like we could take Latin because they outsourced their language classes to a school that specialized in languages. So even though it was still a public school and it was still somewhat rigid, even in our higher level literature classes, we had some choice in what we read and some of the projects that we worked on. So I had a lot more choice than I would have had if I had stayed in the high school that I started in. So I can definitely see where there are a lot of benefits to that.
So you definitely run into people, I definitely have run into people who want to keep this kind of one-size-fits-all state system, but try and reform it in some way to address these problems that have come up that sort of they don't see these problems as being fundamental to the system, but as things they can fix concretely. I'm getting the impression, and I've certainly sort of our view that that's a completely false idea, and that you need this competitive approach, this outside innovation coming in. So what would you say to people who try and sort of fix the broken model without allowing that open competition and innovation to happen?
Yeah, reforming the education system is a battle that you lose before you even begin. There are so many reasons why. One, and you are well aware of this as people who talk about innovation, it is incredibly hard to innovate inside large bureaucratic systems, and very easy to do so outside in the free market where the only real constraint is, are people going to pay me for this or not? And so you can innovate in the free market at a pace that's just unthinkable inside of the system. And I mean, look at the model that we have. Everybody knows that education in America is broken. We hear about it all the time on the news. And yet, how much has actually changed over the past however many decades people have been talking about it? Very little. And it's because it's incredibly hard to change anything when you have this huge bureaucratic system where all these rules are already in place that you have to abide by, and all these people have to sign off on it. And it's a very political issue, and that obviously also makes things very complicated. Reforming the education system in America is not like the closest we're going to get is all of the school choice legislation, which is being passed, which is, there are some really amazing people who are very hard at work on that. And basically the idea is that you can take the taxpayer money that's going just to public schools and it follows the kids. So if the kids go to a private school or they go to an online school or they go to a charter school, the money follows, the funding goes to whatever school they're in. And that type of legislation is really, really exciting because it opens up a lot of options financially for people that they otherwise couldn't have afforded. But like that's the closest we're going to see to actual reform in the school system. Like the entire system is broken. It doesn't make sense to take this very broken thing and try to patch it. What we need is for so many different schools and programs and philosophies to emerge that the traditional system becomes the worst option and becomes entirely irrelevant. And if taxpayer money is following kids instead of following just like the local districts as it currently does, I think that collapse will happen very fast because people can actually afford to go take the best option because their money isn't tied up in this like withholding system for their district school, which is how it's currently set up. And then, kids are going to be able to go find the school that's best for them, and the innovation will outpace what's happening in traditional school incredibly quickly. So, yeah, I think reforming the system as it stands isn't even a conversation worth having. Like, all good change happens through entrepreneurship. All fast-paced, groundbreaking change happens through entrepreneurship. And the education world desperately needs some groundbreaking change. And like I said, it's very overdue too. Like the internet changed everything about what's possible with education, and people haven't even started to catch up with that yet. So once this floodgate fully opens, and I think we're very close because of all of the stuff that's been cropping up post-COVID and the amount, like I think it's 11% of kids in the US are homeschooled now, which is a wild number. Like when I was growing up homeschooled in the early 2000s, that was unthinkable. That's very exciting, and it indicates that people are really ready for change. So as these alternative models start to really gain traction, I think we're going to see this shift happen really quickly, especially if people can afford the options, which for a lot of people is one of the big sticking points.
Awesome. So can we turn now to ask you about the project that you're working on now, which is Rebel Educator, and specifically within that, I took a look at the website, and there's a section on there about project-based learning. So can you explain what that is and what its benefits are in your answer?
Yeah, so Rebel Educator, our goal is to be the resource for parents when they say, my kid isn't happy in the traditional system, I don't know what to do next. Because right now, a clear jumping off point for people doesn't exist. There are a lot of people who are commenting on what's happening in education, and most of them are affiliated with a specific project or a specific organization. And we want to be an unaffiliated, neutral resource where, yes, we have a bunch of philosophical ideas about what the right education approach is, but really we're just here to challenge the status quo and to come back to these first principles understandings, and then to like serve as like kind of your reporter on what's happening in the space, what different schools and models are being built, what projects you should be following, what options are available, where to start if you're ready to jump away from the traditional system, but you're not necessarily sure, again, like what those right next steps are. So, creating a set of resources for people where we can help them think through this transition from the public school traditional assumptions to, again, like this first principles understanding of what does my kid actually need to become a successful adult, and how can I facilitate that for them? So that's what we're building. I'm very, very excited about it because obviously I like talking about education, and getting to do it full time is really, really awesome. And we have some investors who are backing us in building this, which is also really exciting, which means that we're able to like put a team together who can dedicate their time and energy to building this. So yeah, our goal is in a couple of years when people say, hey, my kid's not happy in traditional school, like at a dinner party, somebody goes, oh my gosh, are you following Rebel Educator? Like you have to go follow Rebel Educator on Twitter and sign up for their newsletter and read their website and listen to their podcast. Like that's where you start. Like that's how you fix your kid's education. We got a Twitter DM the other day from somebody who said that he's just quit his public school teaching job to go build a self-directed learning center in rural Illinois where there isn't anything besides the public school system. And he said he's already gotten some families signed on who are going to come join him for the fall. And he sent us a message thanking us for the content that we're putting out. And that was so exciting because that's the metric for success. Like when we start seeing people taking action on these things that they know are broken, but they don't necessarily know what to do next. Like that's how we know we're winning in the battle of setting kids free, which is what we're here to do. And I think, like to your question about project-based learning specifically, there's so much there's so many different philosophies that we want to expose families to. Self-directed learning, project-based learning, hybrid learning models where you're like blending different things. And that's part of what we want to serve too, is we want to be a resource hub for all of these different philosophies where we can start to expose parents to them and kind of like give them the people who've never thought about this stuff before. They've just always assumed that the public school is a benevolent force that is going to set their kids up for success. And they're like, wait a second, this is actually super broken. Like expose them to the different things that are out there, give them enough of a framework to kind of like a set of questions maybe to ask about their kids. Like, okay, what is my kid like? Which of these makes the most sense for them? And then give them a jumping off point to go find everything that they need to pursue each of these different models and frameworks. And then again, publishing a lot of content on like a lot of the kind of like more nuanced pieces of these different education philosophies too. So that's what we're building. It's something that like, it's very new. We're just getting started. But I'm really excited to see what our content library looks like in like 6 months.
Awesome.
I want to kind of finish up by coming back onto sort of our show's theme a bit because we're very much here been talking about innovation in the field of education. That's something we really needed to talk about. I'm glad we have. But oftentimes when we're talking about innovation in other fields, education comes up as a problem that's hindering innovation in those areas because people are coming out of school without the skills they need to be innovators in aviation or without the attitude they need to be an innovator in whatever, like provision of services of one kind or another. So how can we use education to create the next generation of innovators, to give them that mindset of thinking outside the box, of thinking scientifically, of being actively interested in the things around them in the world? Because people like Elon Musk come along when somebody's passionate about space or passionate about computing or whatever, and there's far too little of that kind of passion. People don't come out of school passionate about anything. So how can we encourage people to become innovators in other fields as well?
I love this question. And I think it's never been easier to be an innovator than it is now. because of the amount of access that people have to information. Like, you can go become a subject matter expert in anything that you want with very few barriers to entry at this point, besides your own willingness to put in the time, because so much information is available at your fingertips. So many books are available open source online, or you can just like click a button and buy them, and like you have access to them immediately. Like MIT's whole course library is available for free online. There's so much stuff that is available, and so many people who are available at a click of a button. You can DM whoever you want on Twitter. You can go find the subject matter experts and send them questions and network with them. So becoming an expert and then making it to the edge of what already exists in your field and then pushing that boundary is easier than it ever was before. And also the surface area of arenas in which we can innovate is constantly expanding, because we just keep inventing more stuff, and everything that we invent and create becomes a thing that can be innovated upon. So we have this exponentially expanding realm of things that we've already created as humans and that we're already doing that can be improved. And so there's also greater opportunity to innovate. And so really the problem is just setting kids up with the paradigm of being an innovator, which kids have to varying degrees. Like, it's not like if every kid had the same education, they'd all turn into Elon Musk. But there's innovation on both a very broad scale and a very micro scale, and both are important. You can think like an innovator in your mid-level management job at like a mid-sized startup and create amazing value and have a much better chance of outside success in your career than somebody who is just good at like doing what you're told and checking the boxes, which is the framework that traditional school is setting most kids up with. So there's a lot that people who want to be innovators have to either never absorb in the first place because they're rebellious, or they have to go unlearn later to become innovators later in life. And I think that there's a couple, like you touched on this in your question with, Elon Musk is passionate about space. When you give kids the freedom and the encouragement too, because kids do respond well to that, the encouragement to go chase the things that they're innately fascinated by and the things that they're innately passionate about, that makes the likelihood of innovation much larger, because innovation is very closely related to the play instinct. And when you let kids chase what they love, that play that is basically what they're experiencing when they're going and doing these things that they're passionate about, leads to innovative ideas and creative ideas and new ideas. And that's a process that, people who stay up burning the midnight oil, building really great projects, are passionate about what they're learning, and they're passionate about what they're exploring, and it feels like play to them. And that's something that needs to be nurtured in kids instead of stifled. And kids also really need to be encouraged to go try stuff in the real world. Kids don't need to just, again, like sit in rows and do exactly what you're being told to do on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. They need to be given the freedom to like go try the stuff that they're doing and that they're excited about in the real world. They need to go, if they want to be entrepreneurs, they should go try launching a business. If they want to like be space engineers someday, they should go try building a rocket. And they should be encouraged to explore and chase their ideas and innovate on and iterate on the things that they're doing, which school isn't teaching at all, but is a far better education than anything that you'll learn in school anyway. Like, even if you don't come up with some groundbreaking idea someday, like, you're still going to learn all the skill sets that you need to go and successfully launch a business and run it. And like, you're gaining the real world skills that you need that are going to translate into the rest of your adult career. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing where kids need to be given the space and the encouragement to go chase their passions, and then the space and the encouragement to go try stuff instead of just, like, again, checking all of the boxes. And they need to be around people who are answering all of their incessant questions that every kid had. Like, what if we did this? And what if this is possible? Like, I don't know. What if we went and found out? With a playful encouragement instead of like, sorry, Billy, we're not doing that right now. It's time to do long division. Like they need to be met with that, something that's going to facilitate that enthusiasm. And if kids are in environments that are doing that, they naturally will go try stuff, and they will go try stuff in a way that, when I was growing up homeschooled and people were like, yeah, go do that thing. That sounds like fun. I had no idea that I was doing anything that was like weird or different. I was just chasing what I was interested in. And it took me like a decade to be able to look back and realize, wait a second, that wasn't normal. Like not every kid does what I did. And they need to have experiences like that where they don't even know they're innovating. They just know that they're following the things that they're interested in. And eventually they're going to have some really great idea that other people are going to be like, wow, I never thought of that before. And they're going to go, it's just like, I was just playing and I came up with this. And I think education's veering in that direction anyway. And the more that it does, the more innovators we're probably going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote an article and it was aimed at adults, but it was about fostering creativity, which I can link in the description. But one of the things is ask questions. One of the things that stood out to me when I was old enough to realize when I was babysitting my 2-year-old cousin is how much she asked why. And like adults don't ask why that much. And we should. Yeah. There's a lot to be learned by asking questions, and so that should definitely be encouraged.
Yeah, I had great fun on the train home last night because this little boy was asking his mum all about aeroplanes. And so as I was getting up to get off, I strolled over and said, so I've flown a couple of aeroplanes, so I can answer this question.
Answer some of these questions,
yeah. And I just like his face lit up and the mum felt relieved. So I hate it when kids are asking why and parents are just not interested.
Yeah.
And even if the parent doesn't know, it's like, well, let's
help
think
them
about
find
this.
Out, think about it. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are about out of time here. So our last question is just, you mentioned Rebel Educators on Twitter, and you guys have a website we'll link to. Is there anywhere else that people should go to follow Rebel Educator or you yourself, that if they want to learn more about the stuff we've been talking about?
Yeah, you can follow me personally on Twitter. It's just at Hannah Frankman. If you follow Rebel Educator on Twitter or you go to our website, which is rebeleducator.co, you can find that's a jumping off point to everything else that we're working on. So that's where I would send people to start. We're going to be launching a podcast in a couple of months. So depending on when you're listening to this, that might already be a thing, and you can check that out too. And feel free to hit me up on Twitter too. My DMs are open. I'm always happy to chat. So if there's anything here that was particularly interesting, I would always be open to conversation about that. But yeah, that's where I would send people. That's everything else is linked from everything else. So that's the best jumping off point.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fabulous conversation.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for joining us on Innovation Celebration.